perhaps I can begin by asking, is there anything specific you have dealt with, any specific ideas which especially relate to trying to damp down religiously motivated violent conflict? Yes, sir.
Thank you. As I clarified at the outset, the United Nations does not distinguish between the various forms of conflict. Our objective is that once the conflicts begin, for whatever cause, our objective is to remove that source of conflict, which is the unregulated flow of arms and ammunition. That doesn't mean to say that that's the most important thing. Once you remove the weapons, there's still animosity for religious, economic, or whatever reasons, and they need to be dealt with. I think my colleague at the table spoke a lot about why people fight, and in my case, once they have fought, our job is to try to remove the weapons, and then my colleagues in the mediation division of the Department of Political Affairs and the UN, their job is to come in and to analyze the reasons why people fight, and try to suggest solutions and promote the adoption of various measures to address each of those specific root causes. There are many root causes to conflict, and the proliferation of small arms and light weapons is just one of them, and that's what we deal with. But as we all know, there are other root causes which we don't deal with in my office, but there are other parts of the UN, particularly in the Department for Peacebuilding Operations and the Department for Political Affairs. They address those issues.
I just want to extend it to our first speaker and ask, there were a number of, well, for the basic thing for the second speaker is try to deprive people of the weapons, and then at the same time work with mediation to try to, could our first speaker talk a little bit about the original factors, a number of factors which would bring people to violence to begin with? Is there any way that you can help by removing some of those factors after they have been put in place?
Yeah. So a number of years back, I was asked to go to a summer camp that was being held at Harvard for high school students about debating. And I met a 15-year-old who was cursed. And he was cursed in several ways. The first way he was cursed was his parents got a divorce. One parent moved to California, the other was on the East Coast, and they insisted that he fly back and forth every single month, which is truly a curse, right? But he was doubly cursed because this was after 9/11, and his name was on the watch list. And so as a 7-year-old, he had to get to the airport 4 or 5 hours earlier. Okay? And I can relate to this. So for 4 years after 9/11, every time I flew, I was randomly stopped. Randomly stopped. Okay? Because my last name is Eric. But this guy was really, really specially blessed by God because his name was on the watch list. So he had to be there as a 7-year-old 4 hours ahead of time. And he did this for most of his life. And by the time I saw him, the anger in this kid was astronomical. And I have to say, I give this kid a lot of credit because he said that his life's goal as a 16-year-old, he was going to be a human rights lawyer. That's what he was going to do. He was going to go to war against this kind of abuse as a human rights lawyer. But that's not the way everybody goes. And so I think if we want to work towards preventing this, getting governments to treat people like human beings as much as possible is really a critical factor. okay? And I'll give another example. So I was once working on a kibbutz, and I met this guy. He was in his 60s. This was a while ago. And there was this big argument about the meaning of Zionism. And the guy said, well, I won't use the word he said. He said, all this discussion about different kinds of Zionism is bull blank. And I said, why? He said, well, when I was 12 years old, my mother said, you know what, go into the field, I'm having a bad feeling. So he took his 3 sisters to the field with him. He went into the field. When he came back, his mother was gone, and all the other Jews in the community were gone. And one of his neighbors, who was very good friends of him, started chasing him down. He went into the field with his sisters. They went towards Russia. And they kept going towards Russia. One of his sisters froze to death. He kept his other 2 sisters alive. And he said, there are only 2 kinds of there's only one kind of Zionism. There's gun Zionism. Because if we don't have guns, they kill us. And if we do have guns, we can stop them from killing us. And preventing people from embracing gun anything is done by not treating them badly.
I could just, there has been some research, Linson Steppen, I guess, quite old, research about Latin America, Colombia, I think. And one of the things was both sides did have the guns, but it lasted so long, generations of conflict, and it was finally decided by both sides, none of us are going to win. Do we want this forever, or do we want something else? Although I wrote, that was Linson Steffen, that was the 1970s. But Colombia just made an agreement the other day. So even though in theory they had decided in the 1970s, it kind of continued.
Well, can I just add a sentence to that? So part of the problem is politicians. Now in America, we only have reasonable politicians, as we all know in this current election year. That's a sarcastic comment. But a lot of politicians have a vested interest in keeping the conflict going because it serves their interest. We can see that certainly in the Middle East and many other areas of the world. And so getting people to push for compromise, which is one of the reasons why I came here, getting people to push towards compromise is key because there are politicians who have a vested interest in not compromising.
So you have, I want to open this up to the audience, but I also love to speak. And the only thing is you have to make it so have some other things for the politicians which will be more attractive to them. I believe in bribery myself. But let us open it to the audience, yes.
Is the United States a signatory of the registration of conventional arms? And how are you not able to work with the United States to have it stop funneling weapons into the Middle East? And of course, the United States is making a lot of money doing that.
Or is the United States a signatory, and how do you work with the United States, which is such a supplier? We talk about profit from such a supplier of these arms.
The Arms Trade Treaty, which was just came into force last year, I believe that the United States has not yet ratified it. It's probably signed it but not ratified it. That's one thing. Now, regarding, I don't have information about where the United States supplies its arms. I can't confirm some of what you said. The United States, among many other member states of the United Nations, supplies arms throughout the globe. Some of it goes to governments, and some of it spills over to various conflicts around the world. So I think not only the United States, there are quite a few other countries who benefit in one way or another from the arms trade. And the objective of the Arms Trade Treaty is to sort of harness the moral consciousness of the world regarding the dangers of the unregulated flow of weapons. And hopefully the Arms Trade Treaty will, as they say in the United States, kick in and have the desired effect. But as I said, I want to repeat, the United States exports arms, mainly to governments. Sometimes they may pass arms to various groups, but they're not the only ones. There are a lot of other countries who do the same. And if you look at the text of the Arms Trade Treaty, you will see that it introduces various measures to try to bring some sort of order to the madness of the free circulation of arms around the world.
I think even Bernie Sanders had an issue because he was the mayor of a town which was the Gatling gun capital of the world.
My question is to Professor. First comment, concerning your question of metaphor, I think the classic example of that was in the Rwanda situation, where the radio announcer referred to the Tutsi as cockroaches, and statements like the graves are not filled. Classic example of use of metaphor to exacerbate conflict. And my question to you, sir, is you seem to stress the fact that left-wing organizations are more prone to violence. And I didn't hear you mention right-wing organizations. And I was wondering if that was subsumed into religious ideology.
Right-wing organizations are all peaceful and never cause any problems. So the issue is that in the Middle East, the number of right-wing organizations amongst ethno-political minorities is almost nil. We now have a data set of American extremist organizations. And I can tell you that the analysis of American extremist organizations, those that have what I would call racist right-wing ideologies are more likely to use violence. And the larger issue is when I look across these analyses, ideologies that empower you to other, to say, we're human, they're not human, are the ideologies that empower you to kill. Ideologies that force you to include, so democratic ideologies, gender-inclusive ideologies, make you less likely to use violence. And leftist ideology, when it's formulated in a communist fashion coming from Russia and China, which is where a lot of these ideology exports were coming from in the Middle East and so forth, also has that power to other groups of people. And so it's that othering that gives you that power that motivates the killing. And certainly racist right-wing, at least, so I can only do it for the analysis that I have data on. For the American cases, it's clearly having an impact in the way that you're talking about.
So ideology, it depends on the ideology.
So my question is for Dr. Asal. You had said that you have, you and your team have data on a national level when it comes to these issues. And it seems like most of the groups you're looking at are like minority groups, so groups that are, when you're looking at whether or not they pick up violence. But I'm wondering if you know of somebody who's doing any research on a global level, especially looking at the majority group. Like, why do countries like the US decide to go and fight a war in Iraq?
So there are people who are doing analyses. So there are different kinds of violence. The violence that I'm looking at here is non-state actor violence. There's a huge literature on state-level violence, support power, how to maintain power at the state level. If you're talking about majority groups, that gets to the issue of the other research that I'm looking at, which is why discriminate. And a lot of issues related to why discriminate has to do with holding on to power and the political system you have that enables one group to oppress or to get the advantages of oppressing another group. Some of it, though, has to do with ideology and with history. So, for example, I study discrimination against LGBT communities. And when it comes to the LGBT communities, anti-sodomy laws are primarily tied to whether a country has the common law or not. And the reason for that is not that these countries are necessarily religious, but in the 1500s, the British Crown decided everything Catholic was evil, and they decided that Sodom was Catholic, so they outlawed it, and then they conquered 1/3 of the world, and they brought their law with them. When it comes to the death penalty for homosexuality now, that is the only thing that correlates with that, beyond just regular death penalty. The only thing that correlates with that right now is whether it's a religious state or not, i.e. the state itself has religious laws on the books and so forth. So you have something that's being pushed by ideology of the state and something else that's kind of a half-determined history approach.
Yeah. Just very quickly, you mentioned nationalism, and often I think what we see as religious ideology goes back to nationalist oppression of one country by another, or one imperialist country on another. So, yes.
So one of the factors for, let's say, igniting the violence in your list was diaspora. And the reason for that was because people do not feel threatened like to themselves, so that's why it's easier for them to encourage violence. So in that regard, with the current conflicts, how do you evaluate the role of social media? Even not for the, now like with the social media that gives so much easiness to the people, even not the nationalists, those people like who have no relation to the country, it's just, as a solidarity to youth or democracy, so they do, like ignite violence. So how do you?
So that's a very interesting question. It's a question we've actually tried to look at. The problem is that we need money to look at it, and the government right now is more interested in funding stuff that you're already using violence, is supposed to start using violence. So, and there are other issues. So it is on my list of questions to answer, but I can't give you a useful answer at this point.
Mm-hmm. I like numbers, and the number that you showed us, they are really helpful. But seeing diaspora contribute to 41% to conflict, I think it's because also diaspora contribute to peace building and development through their transferring money. But do you think that diaspora who belong to certain religious political organization who has dogma and ideological perspective, they are the more groups that contribute to support violence, or is it mainly diaspora, or how is the number?
Right, so the issue here is I don't have that disaggregation. In order to get at that, I would need disaggregation of the different kind of diaspora communities. What we've got is a measure of, does this organization in the Middle East get diaspora support? And I want to make very clear here, this is a correlation. The explanation that I have for it, that I said, is a theoretical explanation that I'm attaching to that correlation. There might be another explanation. There are certainly diaspora organizations that try very hard to promote peace, but there's a very clear correlation between if an organization gets a diaspora support, it's more likely to start using violence or to use violence in the first place. And I think the logic there is based on what I said, but that doesn't mean there aren't other diaspora organizations trying to promote peace. And I'm familiar with many of them, but the overall impact is in that direction.
Just a quick comment. I was completely involved in the Jewish diaspora argument about the Iran treaty, where the diaspora in the United States is totally split, and it was just a very emotional, very difficult issue. But the diaspora community is a tremendous, both a support and a restraint group. And when it's split, it's just a whole new type of political world. How are we doing? I think we might be just in time now to go to our next. So let me thank the two.